The halls were falling with excellent manners, which is not how halls usually fall. Pillars bowed to one another before collapsing. Rafters took turns being dramatic, and the bivrost, never one to miss an audience, went from rainbow to afterimage like a stage curtain learning humility. The gods were busy starring in their own endings, a task requiring both heroism and good lighting. So they sent an errand to the only mortal who had ever been accused of improving arguments with refreshments. Her name was SIV, which is unfortunate if you're allergic to fate. Fates love short names because they fit neatly into songs. She kept a brewery on the last sensible hill before the sky became an opinion. And she had the particular expression of a woman whose bread never failed and who therefore did not owe destiny the time of day. Her hair was the color of wheat that had survived gossip. Her hands smelled like honey even when she had been wrestling barrels that day. And yes, it is possible to wrestle and smell nice. The trick is to win quickly. When the horn sounded, Heimdall is punctual the way debts are. The town looked at SIV because towns, under stress, locate competence the way geese locate north. Noisily and with surprising accuracy. "What should we do?" asked a man who had never previously questioned whether his list of tools counted as a personality. "Eat," SIV said, setting dough to rise because if the world insisted on being theatrical, it could do it on a full stomach. She could feel the air change, the way yeast can tell when a room has decided to cheer up. The sky darkened, then reconsidered. Out past the hill, giants were making a mess of the horizon. Wolves were getting their dental work done on celestial bodies. Someone's aunt claimed it was the end times. SIV told her to set plates. The knock on her door was a kind of polite. That means someone believes they are a storm. SIV wiped her hands and opened it. Freya stood on her threshold smelling like gold that had learned better. Cloak torn in a way that looked intentional, because goddesses' refuse to be unflattering. "SIV," she said, and there are 1,000 ways a goddess can say your name. This one was a request hiding in a compliment. "If you want bread," SIV said, "it's nearly ready. If you want a miracle, you're late." Those went out with the morning deliveries. Freya smiled the way lions pretend they're cats. "We need Mead," she said. "The last Mead." SIV glanced at the horizon, where doom was doing laps. "Of course you do," she said. She gestured to her tables. "Sit." "No, not there. That bench judges." Freya sat on the not judgmental bench, which creaked in protest, and then bragged to the other furniture about its guest. "We need the kind of mead," she said, "that will be remembered as a taste of beginning when people tell stories about ending. It must be brewed in a day and an age. It must contain what is left of our better selves. It must be strong enough to make grief sit down and agree to bread." "That's a lot," SIV said, which is what bakers say when asked for a cathedral with a bun in the middle. "What else?" "It must invite the next world," Freya said, "and it must be delicious. Obviously," says IV, "because there is no point in surviving if you have to pretend to enjoy bad mead." They made a list because lists keep panic from filing for residency. Freya conjured a piece of parchment with a sigh. The parchment pretended it had been paper all along. "Ingredients," SIV said, picking up a piece of charcoal. "Honey, water, grain, and..." Freya added, "one tear I'm not ashamed of." SIV nodded. Tears are saline and useful. "Yeast, of course." "The living kind," Freya said, "not the patient kind. It must eat and sing." "Spices." "Not many," said the goddess. "This is not a circus. This is a promise." SIV wrote, "Promise," then paused. "Where exactly will the gods be?" she asked with the politeness bakers reserve for customers who have ordered a cake for yesterday. "Busy being nouns," Freya said. "Thor will be thunder. Tyr will be return. Odin," she lifted a shoulder in a shrug learned from battlefields and teenagers, "will be story whether or not he likes it. Loki will be consequence. Don't scowl. The man is useful. I will be love without jewelry. We will not be available for note-taking." "So I brew alone," SIV said, and the room noticed that alone in her mouth meant precise, not fragile. "For a while," Freya said. "Then everyone brings what they have left that is still worth sharing. That is the recipe." SIV put down the charcoal and folded the list as if tucking a child in. "I have honey," she said. "From the hives that learn to disapprove of bears. I have grain. I have water that does not apologize. I have barrels that know their jobs. I have a heart that has never betrayed me. What I do not have is time." "The world is ending," Freya said, very gently. "Time is on sale." They moved outside because kitchens are for work, and the conversation had become a guest. The hill looked down on a run of fields that had grown tired of being harvestable. The wind paused to eavesdrop. SIV went to her hives. Bees flew in the pattern of paragraphs. She murmured to them the way women who speak to bees remember to keep secrets interesting. "Ladies," she said, "we're making history. Bring your best golden verbs." She brought out combs full of honey that tasted like 1,000 patient afternoons. She did it with the care of a priest who had stopped believing in incense but not in hands. Freya watched and tried not to turn into a metaphor. Goddesses are weak to metaphors when mortals are competent. SIV heated water, crushed grain, built the mash like a plan you intend to keep. Freya lifted her cloak and from its lining pulled a vial the size of a regret. "My tear," she said, "from the day I laughed at a joke and realized it was about me. It is not sadness. It is clarity." SIV took it as you take a knife from a friend, by the handle and with thanks. "Not yet," she said. "That goes in at the moment the Mead decides to be brave." "Ah," Freya said, "you are a theologian." "I am a brewer," SIV said, "which is the same job with better smells." The sky boomed in a way that means Thor is doing his resume. Lightning stitched itself between clouds like a tattle. The ground changed its mind about which way was up, then apologized at the table. SIV stirred the mash with a paddle that had scolded many a brew into greatness. She hummed under her breath. Not a song, a habit, and the sound put backbone into the steam. "Someone will bring you barley from a field that refused to burn," Freya said, counting on fingers that had held victory and onions. "Someone will bring you a slice of silence from a monastery that learned to listen. Someone will bring you a bell. Someone will bring a hinge. I will bring the peach." "You're a goddess of love," SIV said. "You bring metaphor. Peach is acceptable." "A literal peach," Freya said, and blushed in a way only goddesses find flattering. "From a tree that grew in a bowl where someone had been keeping their grief. It tastes like someone gave up being proud long enough to be fed." SIV's face softened the way bread softens when it admits to being warm. "We'll juice it," she said, "at the right moment. Don't rush the right moment." The first arrival was Thunder, not Thor, who was busy negotiating with a snake larger than a grudge, but a mason jar containing a piece of lightning that someone had kindly persuaded to calm down. A woman in a storm cloak set it on the table and backed away. He said, she panted, to add it responsibly. I told him that word looked strange on his mouth. He agreed with tragically good humor. SIV held the jar up. The lightning flickered like a child trying not to laugh. "We'll use it," she said, "to wake the yeast. Once. Not as a trick. As an introduction." She set it aside like a promise she intended to keep with flair. The next arrival was a boy carrying a bundle wrapped in starcloth. He looked at Freya and did the thing boys do when divinity confirms their suspicion that beauty is not theoretical. He set the bundle down and unwrapped it, a square of shadow from the city that locked its doors and then didn't. They said, he recited, to let the Mead rest under periodically so it doesn't start thinking it's responsible for sun. "Good," SIV said, covering the cooling pot for a minute. "Everything needs a nap." A monk came, breathing like someone who had learned to allocate wind. He offered a small, clear jar labeled noises we are proud of. Inside, a child's whistle, the clink that announces dinner, snow choosing to be pretty instead of cruel. "For the ferment," he explained on his slate. "Yeast likes morale." "Of course it does," SIV said, taking the jar as if it contained the other half of her spine. From the River Parliament came a woman with wet shoes and a grin that had unionized. She poured into a bowl a cup of water that had remembered itself correctly. "From Cutwater's alone morning," she said. "No coins tossed. Just breathing. Blessed be breathing," SIV said, and meant it in 3 languages, as she worked, Something happened in the yard that had nothing to do with apocalypses and everything to do with bread. People arrived with what they had not hoarded: flour, stories, chairs, the kind of jokes you have to be tired to tell well. Someone lit a fire and argued with it about onions. The fire agreed. Children chased each other in epic figure eights that would later be misremembered as folk dances. The hill itself stood a little taller, as hills do when they realize they're being used correctly. SIV cooled a mash and strained it into the great copper, the one her grandmother had winked at as if copper understood flirting. She called for the honey. The bees obliged with a humming like a recipe being recited by memory. The wort went blonder, braver. Freya pressed the peach into SIV's hand. SIV sliced it the way you cut something that has earned gentleness. Juice ran into the mead like an apology that was also a beginning. "Now," Freya said and offered the tear. "Not yet," SIV said, and for a moment the goddess looked like a woman, and the woman looked like a law. SIV fetched her crock of yeast, the one she'd been feeding since before she knew what hope was called. It had a name, Starter, and the kind of temperament that scares men who think they like control. She coaxed it into the warm, sweet sea, and it woke with the delight of a creature whose job has arrived. Bubbles lifted like good gossip. The yard smelled like God would smell if God baked. "Now," SIV said and uncorked the vial. The tear dangled on the lip a second, as tears do, dramatic even when asked nicely, and then fell into the great copper. For a heartbeat, the world listened like a jury. The mead changed its mind from good to necessary. SIV took the mason jar of lightning. "Don't you dare be clever," she told the spark, which shivered like a dog trying to sit. "Introduce yourself. Then leave." She tipped the jar. A thin thread of bright fell in and shook the mixture by the collar the way aunties shake children who are pretending to be asleep. The yeast cheered. The bubbles got their act together. The mead began. They sealed the copper and tucked it under the square shadow for a while, the way you tuck pride in after a compliment, so it doesn't become a nuisance. People ate. Freya, who had not been offered this kind of kindness since she'd learned to wear armor, took a piece of bread with her fingers and did not pretend not to be moved. She walked to the edge of the yard and looked out at the war the world was having with itself, then looked back at the table where someone had just told a joke about Thunder's patience and nearly choked on stew laughing. "Is this treason," she asked, returning, "against endings?" "It's maintenance," SIV said, "of your courage." The sky made a noise that could have been victory or it could have been fatigue. It didn't matter. The pot hummed. Bees approved. Wind delivered the smell of rain that wasn't going to be a drama queen about it. A child fell asleep under the shadow square and did not dream of drowning. "Tomorrow," Freya said, "I will bring others." Tyr has one hand and too many truths, but he will bring a legal promise and a good knife. Loki will bring laughter he has learned to be afraid of, which is the only kind worth using. Heimdall will bring the sound of an honest dawn. The rivers will bring holidays. The city will bring hinges. Winter will send a nap. "Lovely," SIV said, already calculating headspace, vessels, time, how to tell a brew when it is lying about being ready, and how to coax it into telling the truth. "I will need more barrels. Someone get me staves that remember holding." A carpenter with tears in his beard stepped forward with a shrug that meant I kept these in case the world wanted a second try. "The wood was for a cradle," he said roughly. "We can give birth to anything that fits." "Mead fits," SIV said. "It always has." Night arrived backstage and peeked through the curtain. She approved of the blocking. She touched the copper, not to bless it. Knights don't bless, they witness, but to make it comfortable with being full. She brushed her fingers over Leaf, who had positioned himself as if he'd been hired to watch Bubbles professionally, and left a star in his pocket for emergencies. She looked at SIV, who was writing notes on a board that had burned twice and survived with character, and wrote a sentence on the air only bakers can read. "You make worlds with patience." "Keep going." SIV set a chair beside the copper and sat, because even competence has knees. Freya, barefoot now because gods get to be people in kitchens, leaned against the doorframe and looked like a poem pretending to be a person. The yard quieted. Loki's name vibrated somewhere like trouble, deciding to be helpful for once. Thor's laughter cracked in the distance and mended its own echo. Odin became a rumor on purpose. The Mead breathed. If you are waiting for a moral, wait a night. This is only the part where a woman says yes to an impossible recipe in the world. Desperate, exhale laughs. Tomorrow there will be more guests and more jars, and at least one argument about whether sorrow belongs in a cup. Spoiler. In trace amounts, yes, it gives depth. Tomorrow someone will say, it's just drink, and SIV will look at them and they will apologize before discovering why. Tomorrow the last meat of the gods will become the first meat of the beginning, and no one will be able to decide which label to write. So they will drink, and then decide, and then forget to decide because a warm, useful truth will have done the deciding for them. For now, the copper thrummed like a quiet drum beneath a tent of shadow and stars. Bees slept with their feet touching. A goddess held a peach pin in her palm like a worry stone she had outgrown. A boy watched Bubbles learn choreography. A raven on a far fence post took attendance, because that is his vice, and found all the necessary names present. Honey, water, grain, laughter, nap, knife, hinge bell, tear, lightning, patience. And if there wasn't time, there was what you use when time refuses to be polite. Everyone. The morning pretended it had done nothing suspicious during the night. It arrived with clean sleeves and a loaf of light under its arm, whistling the tune bread sings when believes in ovens. The copper in SIV's yard was warm the way a leadership speech is warm, self-generating, politely persuasive. The cloth of shadow lay over it like a cat pretending not to eavesdrop. Steam made its case to air. Air signed enthusiastically. SIV had slept in the chair because competence is romantic to no one except people who survive. When she opened her eyes, the yard acquired a little parliament of bowls and spoons and chairs that had shown up of their own accord. Also a sign made overnight by a child with leadership issues, planted by the copper. Do not tap the copper, unless you're the wind or God or SIV. Leaf was already awake, which is a boy's superpower. He had a ladle he wasn't using and a patience he was. It's breathing, he whispered. The copper sighed in agreement. The yeast, having accepted his promotion, danced like a choir whose conductor is late, but unnecessary. Freya came barefoot again because humans invented floors, but gods invented toes. She held the peach pit from last night rolling between finger and thumb as if it were a worry stone. She had successfully worried into obedience. Report, she said, which is how you know a woman has led armies and family dinners. SIV lifted the edge of the shadow cloth. The smell that rose wood in later ages becomes shorthand for we can do this. Honey, yes. Grain, certainly. A generosity that had done the math and decided to ignore it. It's begun, she said. Do not be impressed. Be useful. The hill answered with footsteps. Tyr arrived with his one hand, a knife, and that looked a decent acquire when they had been right too early and had to live with it. He placed the knife on the table, blade toward himself. For cutting cords and boasting, he said. The second is harder. He set down a folded paper, the legal promise he'd brewed all night. We will drink only what makes US true. Annotations permitted, Loki said, materializing out of the kind of shadow that gets jokes first and regrets later. He wore a grin he had traded for something sharp, and it fit well enough to pass inspection. In his hands, a sealed clay jar that ticked. Laughter I am afraid of, he said. Please bruise gently before adding. Heimdall, on schedule because the world needs at least one person who understands doorways, brought a wide wooden horn and raised it to the air. The sound that came out tasted like early morning when you haven't yet remembered complicated news. For racking, he said simply, and for telling people when to come home. From the River Parliament. A dozen small jars labeled with holidays, nap hour, lantern night, reflection exchange. The Eels Committee contributed a slip of paper that read secrets to be sung later. Do not add raw. Winter sent a folded blanket heavy with the patents asleep. The city that had unlocked itself sent hinges tied with blue ribbon. Complaint yawned on the fence, which is his way of signing in. SIV took attendance because Hrafna was off making fun of someone, and the job had to be done. Honey, grain, water, yeast, tear, lightning, laughter, promise, dawn, nap, hinge, Secrets pasteurized. She nodded as if approving the guest list at a wedding where vows were also tools. Now, she told Leaf, we sanitize. He made a face. Sanitize sounds like it doesn't tell jokes. Exactly, she said, handing him boiled cloths with the solemnity of a squire receiving a sword. We keep the good life in and the silly life out. She checked the temperature with a finger that had learned to trust itself above thermometers. Perfect. She glanced at the clay jar ticking in Loki's hands. Open it, she said. One laugh, two at most. We will not intoxicate the mead with our cleverness. Loki, for once obedient, cracked the seal. A sound jumped out, cackling and guilty and very kind to people who had just failed and need to fail better. It fell into the copper and dissolved like sugar that had always intended to be useful. The air lifted. Tyr exhaled like a man who had been holding a courthouse in his shoulders and decided to hold a child instead. Freya stopped being mythic for a second and became merely beautiful, which is someone else's job, but she wore it well. The scent braided itself down the hill and into the town in ways scent learns when it wants to accomplish policy. People stood up from their ordinary catastrophes with the look of citizens inventing a holiday on a weekday. The baker from the next street wandered over with skepticism and clean hands. A midwife arrived out of pure curiosity and immediately began rearranging chairs so births would respect the new geometry. The old skald who had misplaced his best verse under the bed 70 winters ago sniffed, found it, and began humming. Even the goats, those indifferent theologians, tried to look impressed and instead achieved present. And then the scent did what no one invited it to do, but everyone secretly hoped. It woke what had been pretending to be done. Promises crawled out from under throats and stretched. Half-forgiving grudges checked their hair and reflective surfaces and frowned at themselves with deserved respect. Somewhere on the road that used to be rules, two rivals met and forgot which version of their argument they were on and shook hands just to reschedule the fight to a livable hour. Most inconvenient, the wolf came. Not the wolf, the one with a mouth wide enough to accommodate ambition, but his talkative cousin, civilization curious, who had once shared a campfire with men and decided salt was interesting. He padded into yard with the careful swagger of a creature who knows he is an allegory and is trying to keep it down. He sniffed the mead, which is impolite and traditional. Children grab each other's sleeves of the priority system of childhood. Wolf first, mead second, pebbles third. Absolutely not, someone said to the wolf. The wolf grinned in the absence of predation way. I just want to taste, he said, and his voice was grammar done by teeth. I am interested in civilization again. You were interested in legs last time, a grandmother observed dryly. I am older now, said the wolf, and I have read several pamphlets on community. Ah, Loki said, delighted. Which pamphlets? How to sit, said the wolf, and when to leave. Also the ethics of soup. Leaf stood between Copper and Wolf with a ladle that looked more courageous than anyone expected. Rule, he said, no tasting until the meat is ready. And when it's ready, a cup no larger than my honesty. He indicated his palm. The wolf sat. The yard did not remember how to breathe for a second and then did, in chorus, which is how towns survive predators. Not with spears, with tempo. Complaint considered the matter, filed a note under candid intent, and went back to watching the horizon for unnecessary drama. SIV lifted the lid again. The mead had moved from promising to persuasive. A foam like modest snow gathered along the rim. She skimmed eager, saving enough to teach tomorrow's starter the names of things. We'll rack the first run at sundown, she said. Heimdall be loud. Leaf, sterilize the horn. Loki, no tricks. Tyr, read the promise out loud once, quietly, so the mead knows what it has to keep. Freya, peach pit, toss when I say. The day decided to speed up like an employee you made feel useful. The scent wandered into remote corners of the dying world and changed the conversation there. 2. In the Parliament of Rivers, it made West Bend blush and admit that reflections are a type of hospitality. In the monastery, it taught a novice that humming can be a chore properly done. In the city with hinges, it made a locksmith cry at the beauty of a door opening for the first time without squeaking. Winder took a nap on purpose. The eel composed a memo shaped like a lullaby. People arrived bearing ingredients no recipe had requested, and every recipe needs. A widow brought a handkerchief embroidered with a map, where she had been loved correctly. For straining, SIV said, and meant praise. A boy brought a pocket full of smooth stones and one sharp one. For debates, SIV said, and he tucked the sharp one away for later when policy required precision. An aunt brought a recipe for failure and forgiveness, scrawled on the back of a grocery list. SIV read, nodded, and tucked in her apron. Not everything that came in with the smell was a friend. A man arrived with a ledger's worth of righteousness. I hear you're making a drink that fixes things, he said. People will stop deserving their consequences. We prefer repaired deserving, Freya said. Consequences can attend if they bring bread. My brother owes me an apology, the man snapped. Bring him, Tyr said, not unkindly. And a chair. The Mead will not apologize for him. It will make the room bearable while you both tell the truth. The man scowled, which is how men keep their faces from doing honest work. He left, and the yard lost a degree of temperature, and then gained two because someone added humor. At sundown, Heimdall lifted the horn and blew a note that convinced even reluctant ears that it was time. SIV pulled the cloth. The copper exhaled like a saint who has accepted the job with terms. She drew the first clear gush into the horn. It ran with the color of strong sunlight spoken softly. The yard went quiet with the greed of joy that wants to be right. Small cups, she ordered, in the voice of an aunt at a wedding who loves you enough to limit you. The first is for learning. She poured Freya a taste. The goddess sipped, closed her eyes, and witnessed a kitchen from 400 years ago where someone had laughed with their mouth full. She witnessed an orchard where apples had been labeled with jokes. She witnessed a battle where someone had made stew and saved more lives than the swords did. She opened her eyes, and they were less precious and more good. Yes, she said simply. It invites. Tyr tasted and found his hand, remembered holding ropes and letting go of the correct end. Heimdall tasted and heard, in the sound hierarchy inside his head, a new category between alarm and dawn, gathering. Loki tasted and, to his surprise, did not want to invent a lie to make it bigger. He wanted to sit down. He did. The wolf edged closer, as wolves do when no one pretending their stories, and accepted a palm's worth. He tasted and put his chin on his paws and watched the room the way wolves watch flocks when they choose to behave, protective out of self-respect. Then the mortals. A cup for the widow who had brought the map handkerchief. She tasted and remembered where to hang the map. A cup for the aunt with the consequential grocery list. She tasted and decided to buy more salt, less remorse. A cup for the boy with the sharp stone, who decided to keep it in his pocket and learn how to argue with compliments first. A cup for the locksmith, who installed a hinge in his heart. It squeaked once and then remembered manners. Leaf took his taste last because boys with jobs often forget themselves. He sipped and the bell in his palm vibrated without ringing, which is a warning and a blessing. He heard how being alive sounds when you're not trying to be impressive. He sat down, which is how heroes take oaths in kitchens. The mead worked too well, which is an accusation we throw at success when it refuses to apologize for being useful. Laughter arrived uninvited and behaved. Crying stopped hiding and behaved. Old lovers looked at each other with expressions that confessed they had learned new tricks and were willing to retire the old ones. Someone outside the yard began singing off-key. Half the yard joined and corrected with kindness. This is the only miracle worth filing. People practicing being decent with enough fuel to enjoy it. SIV racked the next run into smaller casks labeled by temperament. Quiet bravery, porch talk, wedding after speeches, workday mercy, first honest nap. She did not label the cask set aside for grief, because grief hates being labeled. She just wrote a small, which grief trusts. The God stuff and the mortal stuff and the weather stuff began sorting themselves into a recipe the world could afford to keep, which is when bad news did its job and entered. A runner came from the ridge road, panting like counsel for disaster. "The snake!" he gasped. Thor, he looked around, realized he had rushed into a room that refused to be tragic on schedule, and adjusted. They are busy. The road turns where it shouldn't. Some villagers, trapped in the old hour. Bring them, SIV said, her voice already giving assignments to muscles and minutes. Loki rope, Tyr knife, Heimdall horn, 2 notes for caution, 1 for welcome. Freya, if you're not otherwise glamorously engaged, help me with bread. Leaf. Bell. Leaf said, already standing. SIV took a small cask and wetted the rim of a cup. She did not shout miracle. She had excellent manners. She handed the cup to the runner. For anyone who cannot come, she said. And this, she flicked her eyes to Loki, for anyone too proud to arrive hungry. Loki tied the rope in a knot that promised to behave. Tyr folded his promise into his pocket, which is how legal documents are kept honest. Freya blew on the coals, and the oven awoke like an old soldier asked to hold a baby. Heimdall played the welcome note and the cautious note in correct order. They went out into the not-yet-ended world with the Mead that had gotten ideas. The road did indeed turn wrong. Grief had built a roundabout and left no exits. People were there, walking in circles with dignity, which is a threat when misapplied. We promise to move on, a woman said, stern with exhaustion. You promise a move, Tyr corrected, and cut the ribbon Grief had thrown across the path like a smug ceremony. Loki tossed a rope. It became a game, as good ropes insist. Children laughed, learned the rules, then changed them to be fairer. Heimdall's horn stitched sound through the mess like competent thread. Freya offered bread, and it functioned correctly. People remembered the taste of making good decisions slowly. SIV handed out sips, not as cure as context. The Mead did not erase pain. It made a room around pain with chairs in it. It did not turn enemies into saints. It turned enemies into neighbors who share a wall and have each other's spoons. It did not fix death. Nothing fixes death. It taught the living to take turns speaking so the dead could nap. The talkative wolf walked beside Leaf and did not bite anyone. Civilization is very tiring, he confided. Take a nap? Leaf said. It's in the charter. They returned down the hill in a parade that refused to be official. The copper waited like a heart disguised as ambition. Night came back to check the blocking and found production upgraded to roadshow. Stars considered forming a guild and decided against it. They prefer freelance. The Mead breathed like a creature you can trust to keep the room kind when you go to the well. Not all was settled. Tomorrow someone would try to sell counterfeit Mead with a fancy label and get bitten by complaint. Tomorrow someone would say the brew made people weak and then fall apart in a useful way in a chair by the door and be reassembled by neighbors. Tomorrow giants would come to test whether laughter actually weakens walls. Answer. It changes them into porches. And the wolf would write a pamphlet titled How to Not Eat Your Friends Draft. Tonight there was enough. SIV pulled the shadow cloth over the copper like tucking in a baby and a war at the same time. Freya put the peach pit on the windowsill and said, Grow if you dare. Tyr sharpened the good knife on the soft kind of truth. Loki told precisely one honest joke and could not stop smiling because nobody died of it. Heimdall slept with a horn across his knees, which is security's way of agreeing to be human. Leaf placed a bell where he could reach it if someone needed to be seen and did not ring it because the room had already learned to notice. Hrafna landed on the fence, late and smug, as is his contract. He took attendance with no pen because he is shameless. Pity absent, panic late, patience present, joy inappropriately early, grief kindly chaperoned, hunger being fed, pride on probation, jokes unionized, wolves supervised, gods demoted to decent, mortals promoted to brave. Tomorrow, SIV murmured to the copper, which hummed back a recipe for democracy. We'll rack again, and we'll need more cups. Tomorrow, agreed the morning, eavesdropping greedily from the far side of the dark, I'll bring 4 extra hours. Denied, said Night, amused. They'll make do with the ones they have. They did. They would. The Mead burbled a laugh that would one day be called policy. The valley inhaled. The world, ridiculous and salvageable, rolled over and asked for 5 more minutes. And because no one had yet invented a reason to refuse, the bells allowed it before ringing gently for being alive. The ruins of Valhalla were attempting dignity. This is harder than it sounds. When a hull built for eternities discovers it is mortal, the timbers don't collapse, they sulk. The roof lay in heroic angles that suggested previous ownership of thunder. Shield tiles overlapped like scales. Banners revealed themselves into grammar. A spear with famous opinions leaned against a broken column and pretended to be a tree. And the heroes, the heroes were rehearsing their resurrection the way boys rehearse apologies, loudly, out of order, with a great deal of sword. "From the top!" bellowed a captain whose name contained more consonants than caution. Einerjar in dented splendor tried to leap up from artful sprawls and hit their marks on the beat. A chorus of "H-A" shook a few embarrassed ravens from the rafters that were not. Someone blew a horn that sounded remarkably like a donkey deciding to try opera. A Valkyrie stood in the wrecked doorway, hands on hips that had carried 1,000 men to meanings they hadn't earned yet. Her braids were regulation. Her winged helm sulked from a nail. She had the particular expression of a woman doing metrics on a myth. Tired, exact, unwilling to pretend. A silver token on her breastplate read BRYN. Above my pay grade in runes small enough to count as gallows humor. "Again!" she sighed, because the afterlife loved perfection, and perfection keeps quitting. That was when the smell arrived. It did not knock. It took a polite breath and walked in like a friend who has stopped waiting for you to admit you're lonely. Honey, grain, a little lightning behaving itself, and that reckless permission you taste at the edge of a good cry. Yes, go on, live. Bryn turned. Helmet forgotten. The heroes forgot their choreo, forgot their stage deaths, forgot that glory demands a straight back even when you're lying down. Heads lifted, shoulders dropped. A man with 3 songs left in him sat up and remembered the words to all of them. "What in hell's good kitchen is that?" the captain whispered, awed against his will. "Not hell," Bryn said, nostrils arguing with theology. "Kitchen, though. Definitely kitchen." Out on SIV's hill, a small cask labeled Workday Mercy had just been tapped for a procession of farmers about to attempt forgiveness between rows. Mead thinks with its feet. Its scent goes where usefulness has put down chairs. It stepped through the wound in the world and found Valhalla, because even the dead deserve a hospitality that doesn't confuse volume with courage. The Einerjar tried to act normal, which for them meant forming a shield wall against an aroma. The wall held for 2 seconds, then remembered it was just men with opinions, and sighed into a line of benches no one had ordered. Benches are the final form of every wall that gets therapy. Bryn glanced down her own ledger slate to do items like maintain morale, audit ballots, answer prayer mail, find lost spear, and added, identify smell, argue with policy. She whistled, a sound that had been forbidden on account of dignity. And the ravens returned to their perches because curiosity outranks pride in birds. "It's coming from a mortal side," one raven reported, offended by how interested he sounded. "Of course it is," Bryn said. "The living keep inventing things we forgot to authorize." The captain cleared his throat as if introducing a duel to reason. "If the living are making a weapon, we should seize it." "I think it's bread," Bryn said, and then corrected herself, surprised. "No, not bread. The reason bread works." The smell laid its hand on the ruined doorway, and the doorway remembered being a threshold instead of a trophy. The hall shifted like an old man, deciding he could stand. The spear that had been pretending to be a tree rustled its leaves as if relieved to be caught. "Stand down," Bryn told her men. "Try the radical act. Sit." They sat. It made more sense than anything had in centuries. The meat itself did not arrive. SIV is particular about where cups go, but the idea of it stepped in, and ideas are nothing if not contraband with passport. The air tasted like chairs pulled closer. "Valkyrie," said a soft voice at Bryn's shoulder, and there stood a woman in mortal clothes, flower on her sleeve like an argument she had won. Not Freya. She was elsewhere being useful, but someone who had seen SIV's yard and decided to give the world a day off from despair. She carried a small lidded cup with authority. On its lid, Grief Trust dots. "Who are you?" Bryn asked. "Messenger," said the woman. "Of kitchens." 1,000 warriors with opinions looked at the cup the way cats look at lasagna. Suspicious. Hopeful. Bryn took it, because her job had always been to carry and to decide. The The messenger tilted her chin toward the benches. "Rules," she said. "First sip for listening. Second for apology. Third for song. No fourth. Fourth is for tomorrow." The captain bristled. "We don't sing civilian songs," he said reflexively. Then, catching his own ghost in the act, he added smaller, "We were promised battle." "You were promised an ending worth telling," Bryn said. "Promised by people who didn't live here long enough to learn furniture has ethics." She lifted the lid. The scent concentrated itself. Made a case. Waited to see if law or love would answer. Bryn tipped the cup, touched it to her lower lip, the place where truth tests itself on old vows, and tasted. It was not sweetness. Sweetness is a trick. It was warmth articulated. It was the taste of morning when someone has already put water on, and you realize you are not the only plot in the story. It was a giving up of 3 specific prides you keep in your ribs for emergencies and never needed. It was, to be sinfully clear, delicious. She closed her eyes, and the hall held its breath the way rooms do when a new policy arrives disguised as relief. Bryn opened them, and they were less sharp and more accurate. "We've been brave in only one direction," she said, voice carried with the ease of someone who has abolished intimidation. "We have practiced dying. We have not practiced living. Consider this remedial education." Heroes shifted. Armor creaked into astonishment. Somewhere, a helm slipped off a nail and clanged in the exact key of "You're not wrong." "Listening," Bryn said, and passed the cup. "Who will go first?" A woman with a scar that had been an adored anecdote, when it should have been a quiet lesson, raised her hand. "I always talked over the bards," she confessed. She sipped, and in the mead she heard the sound of a skull being brave enough to cut a verse. "I am listening." Next, a man who had practiced swagger so relentlessly he had forgotten how to walk to the well without narrating it. He sipped, looked at the cup as if it might be a target, lowered it as if it were a child, and said, "I should have taken more turns washing bowls." The hall startled, then it didn't. He looked relieved. Bravery had never been so non-fatal. "Apology," Bryn said, and handed the cup to the captain with the extra consonants. He glared at it like a siege engine. He sipped. You could see the math. "I am sorry to the kitchen for calling it logistics," he said, the words leaving splinters on his tongue. "I am sorry to the boys I taught be loud instead of loyal. I am sorry to my daughter for pretending pride is love." Silence fell in the polite way silences fall, when everyone is trying not to become a better person too quickly. He looked around, blinked twice, and then courageously did not die of it. "Song," Bryn said. No one moved. Singing is intimacy with air. Then, from a bench near the broken hearth, a thin voice started a work song about lifting grain sacks without breaking the promise you made to your back. It had no heroics at all. It was perfect. Others joined. A harmony sneezed and corrected itself. A drum happened. Someone's hands on a table, respectful wood. The hall filled with a sound that didn't need to boast. Bryn set the lid back on the cup. "Tomorrow," she said, and the dead groaned like men told to save room for dessert. "What is this?" the captain asked finally, not unkindly. "Trick? Spell? Treaty?" "Mead," Bryn said, and the word behaved like a verb. "Brewed by a woman who thinks miracles are just patience with better lighting. The living are making a room that can hold endings without becoming a grave. They are inviting us to learn chairs." "Do chairs have honor?" Someone blurted, as if the furniture might be offended. "Chairs have hospitality," Bryn said. "Honor is a virtue best expressed sitting down when other people need the floor." "Is joy bravery?" asked a young Einhuri with the posture of a boy trying not to be made into a story. His voice shook, which is a helmet off. Bryn looked at him as if he had asked for orders and deserved them precise. "Joy under threat is reconnaissance," she said. "Joy after loss is a counterattack. Joy that makes room for someone else's grief is command." A rustle at the doorway. Not enemy. Rumor. Hrafna landed on a splintered beam. Feathers a scandal against all this former glory. He looked around with the satisfaction of a bird who keeps finding proofs for his loud theory that kitchens win. "Attendance," he announced. Ahem. Melodrama. Absent. Competence. Bleeding into floor in a promising way. Furniture. Promoted. Singing, unionize, egos on light duty. Raven, Bryn said, failing to look annoyed. Report from the living? The Mead is escaping into system architecture, Hrafna said. SIV has labeled caste by temperament and lost count of chairs. A wolf is writing a pamphlet. Complaint has eaten 3 counterfeit labels and a helmet plume. Leaf has invented a bell schedule that offends nobody and alarms everyone correctly. Also, your helmet misses you. Bryn considered the nail, the helm, the old job description nailed to the wall behind it. Gather brave men. Deliver them to duty. Repeat. She took the helm down, weighed it the way you weigh inheritance, then set it on the bench beside her. New duties, she said. Gather brave people, living and dead. Deliver them to each other. Repeat. The messenger from kitchens coughed in culinary. The cup wants to go, she said gently. Back across. Tomorrow's sips need tomorrow's mouths. Bryn nodded, returned the cup, and, because she is professional, stole nothing but an idea. We'll build our own, she said. Not of gold, of honesty. She turned to her men. Tasks. You. Repair the threshold so it remembers it is welcome, not border. You. Write a list of apologies that can be sung. You. Find the women who cook for you and bring them back as guests. They are tired of being relegated to metaphors. And you, she pointed at the captain, practice sitting without issuing an order for 1 hour a day. Starting now. Grumbling, adjustments, a few laughs that sounded like swords determining to retire with grace. The shield wall tried again to become a bench. This time it did not creak. It sighed, as if discovering that with love's purpose more than posture. Outside, the Mead scent moved on, doing its unreasonable work in places that had been stuck. It brushed the door of Hell's Hall, which ceased for an hour, to be only stern. It walked through a father's dream and replanted a sentence. I am proud of you for things other than your fear. It visited a ruined field where a girl was teaching herself to whistle and upgraded her curriculum to breathing. Back in Valhalla, someone had the audacity to start a toast. The captain rose instinctively. Bryn gave him a look. He sat. An old soldier, eyes soft in their scarred beds, lifted his cup of nothing yet and spoke as if it contained the world. To tomorrow, he said. Denied, Bryn replied, smiling like a newly flexible law. To chairs. Then tomorrow. Hrafna checked his imaginary clipboard. Joy, present. Regret, supervised. Nostalgia, on a short leash, beginnings scented. Endings, housebroken. He hopped to the doorway, because ravens are always leaving, and paused. Send someone down, he said, when you get your own brew going. The living will judge you mercilessly, which is to say, they will bring bread. Bryn saluted without performance. We will come, she said, and under her breath, so the job and not the myth could hear it. We will be worth our names. Outside, the sky practiced blue. Inside, fallen heroes practiced staying seated long enough to learn a verse not about victory. Bryn chalked on a splintered lintel above the rebuilt threshold the only law that survives the end of worlds. Begin kindly. The ruin did not become a palace. It became a room. The dead did not become living. They became company. And somewhere far away, a woman on a hill tasted her mead and nodded, because something had turned not back, but through. The afterlife of all things had started laughing without permission and lived. Tomorrow, they would argue over cup sizes and choruses. Tomorrow, a god with too much story would ask to borrow humility and forget to return on time. Tomorrow, Valhalla would ship a small cask to Hell label for rooms with no windows and then install one. But tonight, under rafters that decided to remember shelter, a Valkyrie sat down among her men and taught them the hardest tactic of all, how to stop rehearsing dying long enough to practice joy. The mountain had been practicing scowls for so long that weather had taken notes. Cliffs jutted like the opinions of uncles. Snow lay heavy in the folds with the resentful grace of old fur. Caves yawned the way doors do when you've been knocking incorrectly for decades. Somewhere higher up, drums tried to sound like thunder. Thunder, insulted, went somewhere else to be appreciated. Giants lived here and, like most large families, had never met a grudge they couldn't feed. They stacked them like firewood against winters that came at inconvenient hours. They named avalanches after arguments. They told bedtime stories where the moral was always, and then we were right, which is the cruelest lullaby. At the highest ledge, cut into the mountain like a signature done in stone, sat the stronghold of the Skolsdatters, presided over by matriarch Gudrun the Tall Enough, whose chin had achieved its own climate. She was a magnificent old creature, hair white as the inside of storms, eyes like glaciers voting, hands that had learned the weight of hammers and babies, and preferred not to confuse the two. She wore a necklace of iron links large enough to tow villages, and a shawl woven from the stories she had refused to soften. "Scouts," she said, voice strolling across ledges and down into lungs of the unprepared. "What is that smell?" "Treacherous," said one giant, whose nose had grown suspicious with age. "Small," said another, which is how big things describe nuance. Gudrun sniffed, and the air had the audacity to be delicious. Honey grain, the slight fizz of public courage, the soft authority of kitchens. She scowled until the smell apologized by getting even nicer. "It is a plot by smaller creatures," she pronounced, which is what giants say when kindness approaches without a weapon. Below, 3 emissaries picked their way up the goat path with the careful confidence of people who know they belong because they brought chairs. Leaf went first with a bell and a rope and a grin that had unionized. Behind him trudged Sissa Kolvik, broom strapped like a standard, cheeks bitten by winter into honesty. And last came the locksmith from the city of hinges, carrying what diplomacy always needs and rarely brings: a barrel, not too large to be arrogant and not too small to be timid. It was stamped with SIV's hand, and the name of its temperament burned into the wood. Bridge Day. They reached the outer gate, which was a boulder with trust issues. Leaf rapped, polite, then present, then funny. The boulder rolled 3 inches in outrage and stopped to catch its breath. A doorkeeper the size of a barn was waiting with the set jaw of someone promoted above their patience. "State your grievance," she boomed, because that is how you begin in places where joy is considered a rumor. "We brought Mead," said Leaf, and an offer to argue sitting down. The doorkeeper blinked, a weather event. "That is an insult," she tried. "It is a chair," said Sissa. "We're very good at chairs." They were escorted. Escorted is a word when feet become implied threats. To the hall of the Skolsdatters. It was a spectacular room, if you like the aesthetics of certainty. Pillars thick as regrets. Benches so high mortals would need ladders to achieve humility. A ceiling painted with the family history of being right. Gudrun sat a far end on a throne that had outlived several fashions and one dynasty. She leaned her elbow on an armrest carved in the shape of a wolf who looked embarrassed to be furniture. "You are small," Gudrun observed, as if informing them of their weather. "We are portable," said Sissa. She set down her broom with the ritual neatness that has replaced swords in better towns. The locksmith bowed over the barrel, which accepted the compliment with good foam. "State your terms," Gudrun commanded. Around her, giants grinned the way mountains grin when they suspect they will get to keep being cliffs. Leaf lifted the bell. "Bell 1, he said. "We asked for a listening hour. No boasts, no threats, no family history. Just useful nouns. If we break the rule, you get the barrel. Empty. Presumptuous," the doorkeeper muttered, and a bench shushed her. "Bell 2, Leaf continued. "We asked for a trade hour. We give you mead. You give us grudges you're bored of. We compost them. We keep a shovel for this purpose." "You cannot compost a grudge," a cousin scoffed. "They are fossil fuel." "Exactly," Sissa said. "Terrible for the air." "Bell 3, said the locksmith. "We ask for a safety hour. If the mountain complains," at which complaint padded in from behind a column, like a wolf hired to be the conscience of boulders. "We stop and nap. No decisions made tired. Naps decisive." Gudrun smiled like a landslide. "You believe naps will save you." "We believe naps save everybody," Leaf said. "Even queens." Gudrun raised one eyebrow into a separate postal district. "And what do you offer besides lectures?" The locksmith rolled the barrel forward. "Bridge Day," he said. "We pour it and build with it. Helms have been repaired over it. Doors have made their apologies over it. Wolves have reconsidered pamphlets over it. It is mead brewed during endings for the purpose of beginning. If it is poison, you may eat us. We will eat you whether or not, said Nephew, and three aunties hissed his name into shame. Gudrun leaned over her throne, and the necklace of iron links clinked like a judge discovering mercy. Pour, she ordered, and we will consider insulting you or promoting you to guests. The locksmith set 3 cups on the stone table, each carved from different betrayals. Oak that had been a gallows, horn that had been a boast, stone that had been a border. He filled them a finger's width, the way you do when the room has to learn what full means gradually. The mead breathed. The hall didn't want to admit it, but pillars secretly admire fermentation. Both know how to hold. Gudrun took the oak. It warmed her hand even before the first sip. She tasted and, to her anger, she remembered things that had not aged properly. Her mother lifting a bread from a hearth and laughing at the burn on her thumb. Not because pain is funny, but because she had been on time for once and the world was allowed to tease her. Gudrun had turned that woman into a statue in her memory. The mead made her a person again. It was deeply inconvenient. Small, she said stoutly. This drink is small. Useful, Sissa said. Those often overlap. The nephew who had threatened to eat them drank from the horn and accidentally put down a grievance he had just sharpened for parade. My brother, he muttered, furious at Grace, always leaves his boots in doorways. I will kill him. He paused, annoyed at the failure of his script. Or move the boots and tell him to stop, with examples. Mediocre. Observe an uncle to no one in particular. Sweating honesty. The doorkeeper drank from the stone cup and remembered being 8, standing on a ledge and not being afraid for the first time, not because she had become brave, but because a hand had held her collar while she learned. The hand then let go on the exact right second. She blinked. Who held me? She demanded the hall, which pretended to need more light. Gudrun drummed her fingers on the armrest until the wolf looked hopeful, then gave up. Terms, she said again, but the word now asked questions instead of enforcing answers. Why would giants drink small? Leaf did what boys do best when they've been taught correctly. He told a story without using himself as a shield. In the city that locked its doors, he said, we learned hinges. Locks say no. Hinges say maybe. Your strength has been a lock. We brought a hinge. The hall had never been asked to nod. It tried it. The rafters complained, and then shrugged. Sissa leaned on her broom like a spear that had gone to therapy and found employment as kindness. You keep grudges like you keep goats, she said to Gudrun. Free range. Loud. Appetites. But goats can be trained to mow lawns and wear sweaters. You could teach your grudges chores. Like what? Asked a cousin, suspicious of even the cutest knitwear. Like warning you when pride is pretending to be justice, Sissa said. Like sitting on your feet when you start wanting to stomp. Gudrun tapped the oak cup against her teeth. It may sound like consent thinking. Let's be improper, said the locksmith. We didn't bring merely a drink. We brought a treaty. He unrolled a page. It was not long. Giants appreciate brevity if it can lift something. The Charter of Flow had contributed a clause. The monastery had added a listening hour. The city had scribbled a note about porches in the margin. Valhalla had sent a blessing disguised as a heckle. It read, we will meet. We will speak and listen in equal parts. We will trade grudges for work and pride for jokes. We will ring a bell for being alive before we lift a hammer. We will keep one beautiful surprise per season and never schedule it. We will nap before declaring war. Begin kindly. Gudrun snorted. Begin kindly, she repeated, as if beginning were ours. It is, said a voice as old as the mountain, and every head turned toward the cave mouth where the elders seldom came. Out shuffled Oma Skolsdottir, mother of Gudrun, grandmother of half the avalanches, small only by their standards and unstoppable by any. Her shawl was the color of snow, deciding to be reasonable. Her eyes had the humor of glaciers that have outlived 3 kings. You taught me to swing, Gudrun said, caught off duty. You taught me to build. I taught you to feed, said Oma. She took the oak cup out of her daughter's hand the way only mothers do without losing tenderness. She sipped smacked her lips, and nodded. It's good. It's small, but it works big. Like wrenches. Gudrun made the particular face of a warrior reconsidering hardware. Humph. Oma pointed her bony chin at Leaf. Do you ring that bell for giants too, boy, or only for creatures you can carry? Leaf lifted it. We ring for whoever is awake and needs to be seen, he said. No size limit. Ring it. Oma ordered. Quiet. Right. He did. The note threaded to the hall and out over the ledges, down among goat paths and up among storm balconies, under the pride that lay snow-thick and over the shame that melts at the wrong time. It said, neighbors. It said, sit. It said, you can be enormous and gentle without exploding. Goats nodded wisely, which is their political ideology. Gudrun narrowed her eyes. Fine, she said. We will attempt your 3 hours. If we end up eating you, you'll be very easy to digest with all that mead. Documented, said Complaint, producing a small ledger from nowhere. Attempt hours. Do not eat emissaries yet. Evaluate. Listening hour, Gudrun declared, mostly to test whether her tongue would quit in public. Say useful nouns. Snow, said Sissa. Needs drains. We can help dig. Boast, said a nephew, and corrected himself, mortified. Bridge. We broke 3. We need 1. Boots, said the doorkeeper, looking at the nephew who annoyed her and herself for letting him. We will put them on the pegs we built, and never use because pegs seem like rules for small people. Stomach, said Oma. We will sit and eat now, because brave is better on bread. Trade hour, Leaf said, and the locksmith tapped the cask. He poured along the table the careful width of a piece that expects to be kept. Giants lifted cups the way mountains lift fog. Arguments unbuckled themselves and sat down. Andes, who had been angry since 3 generations ago on a Tuesday, tried laughing in the new key and were disgusted to discover it fit. Uncles whose stories had calcified into statutes found a clause that allowed for revision. Someone apologized to a boulder for assuming it had no inner life. The boulder accepted with grace and improved drainage. A spill happened, as all meetings with hands do. Bridge Day Mead ran across stone and pulled in the groove where hammerheads usually sit between moments. Gudrun swore magnificently. Sissa, without asking, put her broom to work. The locksmith grabbed a cloth. Leaf put his bell down to hold the barrel steady. Oma laughed. A sound mountain birds will be quoting for 5 winters. This, she said, is the Part 1 trust. People wiping together. Gudrun looked at the puddle and the smallness of the mortals bent over, and the largeness of the hall bending imperceptibly toward usefulness. She thumped her iron necklace with a finger. Bring us your hinges, she told the locksmith. Our gates have been proud for too long. Tomorrow, said the locksmith. Now, corrected Oma. Safety hour, said Complaint from under the table, where he had claimed jurisdiction. He yawned, and the room remembered its knees. Giants stretch like landslides. Mortals rest like kettles cooling. Brooms lean like flags. Nap fell over the hall with the authority of Winter's signature, and no one disobeyed because paperwork is powerless against blankets. They woke softer and therefore harder to manipulate. Gudrun called for ink as if summoning a storm. She signed the charter with a thumbprint large enough to be an eclipse. She added a clause in a calmer hand than her daughters had ever seen. We will teach our anger chores. We will measure our strength by how much gentleness it can carry without spilling. The doorkeeper approached Leaf with dignity in both fists. About the bell, she said. We have a horn that only says war. Could you, teach it the other notes? Leaf lifted the bell and let it touch the horn's rim like a kiss. Invitation, he said. He struck the bell. The horn learned. Trade. The horn learned. Safety. The horn sighed into new employment. Outside on the far slope, avalanches paused in baffled admiration. Sissa took 3 giant girls with hands like future bridges and walked them to the arse, sweeping without apology. The locksmith climbed a ladder made of cousins to oil a gate hinge that had been celibate for a century. When it swung, the air clapped. Oma told Gudrun a joke. Gudrun didn't laugh. She restructured a policy. By evening, the mountain had added 3 civilities to its geology: a shelf above the fire for cups that weren't empty yet, a bench near the door for neighbors who needed to sit before deciding whether to come in, a bell hung at the ledge where messengers arrive, rung not to intimidate, but to invite the lungs to behave. They poured a last round of bridge day and left the rest in cast for later, because self-control is the most flattering jewel a hall can wear. When the emissaries turned to leave, Gudrun stood. The room, accustomed to obeying gravity with deep feeling, rose too. "Tell Ivy," the matriarch said, "that giants are considering chairs. Tell her we will send her a barrel in return brewed with snow melt and regret, and the exact laugh you make when you stop being wrong on purpose. It will be large. It will be small. It will be ours." "Tell her yourself," said Oma, satisfied to have her world misbehave toward good. "With your feet." Gudrun snorted, which in giant is the grammar for "we'll see," and in grandmother is the grammar for yes. They descended by the goat path in twilight with a wolf for company, because civilized predators are very nosy about progress. The mountain behind them cleared its throat and, without meaning to be sentimental, practiced a new trick, echoing laughter without getting jealous of it. Far below, SIVs who caught the sound and warmed it and threw it back like bread. Night found them on the ridge and walked with them for a while, asking for updates. Leaf told her about horns learning manners. Sissa told her about brooms becoming flags. The locksmith spoke of hinges and naps. Night hummed, pleased, and slung one more star over the mountain to remind grudges the sky is not theirs. Back in the stronghold, Gudrun stood alone in the hall, finger tracing the new clause on the charter. "Begin kindly." She sat, carefully, like an avalanche deciding not to, and felt the wall become a bench behind her spine. It did not diminish her. It supported her. It is an embarrassing thing to admit this late in a dynasty, but dignity sits better than it stands. Tomorrow, emissaries would come from other ledges asking for copies of the charter and talking very fast about goats. Tomorrow, a nephew would suggest monetizing the Mead and have his proposal fed to complaint with a compliment on the penmanship. Tomorrow, the mountain would practice a new avalanche that stops just short of houses on purpose. But tonight, Gudrun lifted the oak cup, tasted small, and learned that the largest thing she could be now was good. On the path, Leaf swung the bell by its strap, and it did not ring, which meant the world, for the space of 3 breaths, could afford to keep moving without being called. He looked at the stars that refused to unionize, and at the road that had remembered it was a road, and at his hands, which had become quietly very busy. What next? He asked the air that had taken up scheduling as a hobby. A god with a ledger, Hrafnus said from a black piece of night that turned out to be him. "We'll bring him a nap and a pie chart where one slice is labeled mercy." They laughed, small correctly, and kept going, carrying a barrel that had made a mountain admit to furniture, and a bell that had taught a horn to stop picking fights, and a broom that was now a treaty in disguise. The world, large and teachable, made room. Asgard's ruins had finally stopped pretending to be a lesson and settled for being a place. Stones that once insisted on prophecy now accepted moss. The shattered gate, which had spent months auditioning for allegory, resigned itself to wind and the occasional goat. If glory wished to haunt, it would have to take a number and wait. The receptionist was busy with sunlight from the river valleys and hinge-bright cities and mountain halls with newly civilized horns. They came because the air itself had posted the invitation. It did not arrive by raven or rune. It arrived by scent. Honey learning law, grain admitting laughter, lightning with its elbows tucked in. It threaded through dream and road with the unarguable authority of bread at dinner time. Even the stubborn listened, especially the stubborn. Odin was waiting, which is to say he was pacing in a way that looked like patience. He wore travel more than power now. Cloak burned at the hem, hat honest about weather. His spear leaned against a column, as if testing the concept of retirement. In his one bright, inconvenient eye there was a look of a man who was paid too often in blood, and is considering other currencies. Behind him, Frigg, who had kept nations and laundry lists and preferred the latter. Tyr arrived without fanfare and with a knife that told the truth in small, digestible slices. Freya walked barefoot because gods, when they remember their people, like to bar the floor. Thor came late and early, as thunder does hair full of weather and apologies. Loki stood in shadow that did not mind him, wearing a smile he had sanded until it could hold weight without slipping. The remaining gods gathered. Fewer than a council, more than a rumor, each carrying the end they had earned in the beginning they were trying not to drop. Mortals climbed into the light with practical grace. SIV with the copper smell of competence under her nails, Leaf with the bell and a schedule that had learned to blush, Sissa with her treaty broom, the locksmith with hinges that knew when to say maybe, the river envoy with a jar of alone morning labeled do not show off. Giants came by the goat path because humility had finally taught them shortcuts. Matriarch Gudrun and Oma in shawls heavy with new clauses. From Valhalla, Bryn escorted a bench because some things you bring and a cup with a dot on its lid. Complaint arrived from nowhere and sat exactly where an argument would have liked to be. And the dead, tidy, polite, properly astonished, stood at the shade line, like guests unsure of dress code. Bryn saluted them without ceremony. "Company," she said, and the shade moved back one step, as if the world had pulled out a chair. Hrafna chose a toppled lintel for his stage and performed his vice. "Attendance," he announced. He did not have a ledger, he had audacity. Melodrama, regrettably absent. Dignity, late but teachable. Secrets, pasteurized. Apologies, warming. Grudges, assigned chores. Laughter, gainfully employed. Wisdom, under investigation. Courage, off probation. Wolves, civil service. Bells, paid up. Gods, demoted to decent. Mortals, promoted to necessary. Odin smiled like a man caught practicing humility. "Raven," he said, "we will miss your silence." "I don't bring that," said Hrafna. "I bring counting." "Speaking of, where's your hoard?" "My hoard?" Odin echoed, offended on behalf of metaphysics. "Wisdom," Hrafna said. "You kept it like money. You charged interest in riddles. Today we are transitioning to a kindness economy. Your assets are liquidity. Please, poor." The old father of riddles, to his considerable credit, laughed first. It sounded less like thunder and more like a kettle finding its boil. "Very well," he said. "We will see if generosity bankrupts me." SIV rolled a barrel forward. Not the first. Bridge Day had done its mountain work, but a cask she had named in chalk with the irreverence of people who have better things than reverence. Council's drink. On the wood she had burned a small sentence. "Begin kindly." The letters looked like fence posts along a path nobody would own. Heimdall set the horn on a broken plinth, as if coronating simple things. Freya brought the peach pit and a bowl of water, and placed them like parentheses around the work. Tyr unfolded his promise. "We will drink only what makes US true." Loki produced his jar of laughter I'm afraid of, and because this was not a trick. "Ask permission." SIV nodded once. "One stitch," she said. "No embroidery." Odin touched the cask. It was warm the way a loaf is warm, not noble, necessary. He lifted his eye to the assembly and for the first time in his life saw consensus without pretending not to. "Before," he said, "we drank for victory. Before that, we drank to forget. Today I propose a third. We drink to remember correctly, and then we work." "Seconded," said Frigg, which moved the motion with the authority of one who knows where everything goes. "Amendment," Leaf piped up, "because children are procedures with feet. We ring first." He rang. The note traveled like a rumor that had paid its taxes. It said present. It said sit. It pushed at the dead until they remembered chairs, and at the living until they remembered room. Benches happened where once there had been only boulders and hierarchy. Thor, for once, found a seat that didn't expect him to boast. He sat with gratitude in a sandwich someone had bullied him into accepting. SIV drew the first pour. It had deepened overnight from gold to the color of a story you tell after the dishes. She passed a mouthful to Odin. He did not throw it back like a hero. He tasted it like a farmer. The mead moved through him and rearranged an old furniture. His bargains, his boast, the eye he had paid, the well he had robbed, the ravens he had burned with errands. It did not absolve him. It made a room where absolution could go sit and wait while he did better. "What does it say?" Frigg asked softly. "Begin kindly," Odin said, and his voice lost none of its weight for having put down its vanity. "Continue practically." and generously. Freya sipped and became briefly unbejeweled. Merely a woman who had loved and been left in love again and had, against regal training, learned to wash dishes with both hands. Tyr sipped and smiled a small, rare smile. There are battles a knife has no business in. Bryn sipped and heard the afterlife laugh without permission, which means policy must amend itself or be ridiculous. Gudrun sipped and felt her shoulders learn what benches do for spines. Oma sipped and stamped the air with approval, as if it were dough. Then the mortals, then the dead, then the gods again, in no order except usefulness. Cups crossed like bridges. Hrafna took a wet beak's worth and declared it legal. Complaint tasted and permitted joy to proceed with letters of transit. The horn of Heimdall learned the welcome note and the caution note and the nap note. Thor tried all three and survived being admired for restraint. When Loki's turn came, he held the cup as if it were a truth that might give him a splinter. He drank, blinking, and sat unexpectedly. "I feel," he said slowly, "no urge to improve this with lies." "That is improvement," Tyr said mildly, and everyone looked anywhere else to allow them the miracle of not turning that into a fight. A shiver went through the ruins as law changed temperature. Above the gate, where once a sentence had been carved about blood and doom and respectable suffering, letters reassembled. Stone is slow, but it is not stubborn when warmed. The lintel read, "No one eats alone. No one fights tired. Ring before you shout. Begin kindly." Odin raised a brow at the stone, as one craftsman to another. "I did not order that." "The world did," Hrafna said. "You're very welcome to sign it. Add a clause. Call Gudrun large and particular. Teach your anger chores." Frigg added, without standing, "and wash your cups." Valhalla's dead shuffled to the shade line, as if expecting reprimand. Bryn waved them forward like a waitress who knows a good table is open. "Company," she repeated, smiling in a new grammar. "Sing when ready." Someone started the work song about grain sacks. Gods hummed. It did not kill them. In fact, it prevented several small wars. The council did what councils do when they've been fed and forgiven in small, controlled portions. They became useful. The river's envoy read out the holiday schedule and added an estuary clause for reconciling salt and sweet. The locksmith presented a plan for refitting Asgard's gates with hinges large enough for giants and small enough for children to push when adults forget. Sissa proposed nap days and was seconded by Winter, who had sent a sensible wind. Bryn offered Valhalla's new curriculum. Listening, apology, song. Odin volunteered a guest lecture on bargaining without theft, which made two ravens snort. Complaint drafted quiet hours. Loki suggested loud minutes. Freya sketched a school of kitchens and kindness across the realms. Thor agreed to carry flour instead of thunder on designated deliveries and looked suspiciously happy. At some point, and historians will argue whether this was the first miracle or the second sensible thing the gods ever did, Odin stood and walked not to the high stone, but to Siv. He took off the ring he used to remember debts and put it on the Mead cast handle. "We will pay forward," he said. "Not down." Siv blinked because she is not sentimental by default. "We'll need barrels," she said, "and the law to match." "Write it," Odin replied, and handed her the chalk. She wrote on the cask, on the lintel, on the day, "The first drink of the new age shall be shared. Gods with mortals, giants with children, living with the well-behaved dead. No cup too fancy to rinse. Begin kindly." "Motion," Leaf said, emboldened by decency. "We adopt this as heaven's law and the village ordinance and the charter of every porch." "Carried," said Frigg, without vote counting. She could feel the yes. The mead kept working, not as sorcery, as metabolism for communities. Some of the dead stood, stretched, and found themselves not dismissed but adjourned, free to visit kitchens when a lullaby needed senior harmony. Some of the living sat and wept without exhibition. A giant taught a child to whittle a peg for a hinge. A god asked for a broom and was allowed to become comprehensible. Then news came the way news likes to, in a hurry. A messenger stumbled up the slope, hair full of distance. "The snake," he panted. "The sea." He pointed south where a coil of consequence was pushing tide toward breakage. Thor half rose. Old reflexes snapped like reins. Odin lifted a hand and caught not the man, but the moment. "We do not race," he said. "We move together." SIV was already strapping down the cask. Bryn took the bench, because benches travel as medicine. Gudrun lifted a gate as if it were a toy and asked Oma which road was right. Oma pointed where the goats had voted. The river's envoy sorted buckets. The locksmith gathered hinges and promises. Frigg counted towels and names. Tyr picked up his knife to cut knots, not throats. Loki picked up rope and changed his smile to the useful kind. Heimdall raised a horn and played, "We are coming, make soup." Complaint trotted, satisfied. Nothing like a crisis to test a charter. Odin turned to Hrafna. "Count us," he said. Hrafna hopped onto the spear haft and read the room like a ledger. He didn't mind showing. Fear, present but leash trained. Pride, muzzled and in a good mood. Patience, purring. Humor, armed. Bread, rising. Bells oiled. Hands, many. "Go," said the old god, and it did not sound like command. It sounded like permission invented on purpose. They went, down to the new gate that swung like a yes. Across fields where children rang porch bells for being alive, and for fetching buckets, and for seeing the gods walk like people toward work. Through the city whose doors had learned hinges, past a monastery that now rang for joy in the kitchen, along the river where lanterns practiced constellations at eye level, into the mountain pass where the horn had learned to say invitation, not warning. At the shore, the snake was being itself, beautiful, mistaken, enormous. Waves threw themselves into speeches. Wind tried legal arguments. The old world would have answered with thunder and a moral. The new world answered with chairs, ropes, bread, and mead. Listening hour. Leaf called over the wind, because laws are most interesting when applied where they weren't designed. Useful nouns. "Current," said the river envoy. "Angle," said the locksmith. "Anchor," said Thor, delighted to be practical. "Breath," said Frigg, counting. "Slack," said Tyr, and cut the right knot. "Pebbles," said a child, who had a pocketful and a plan. "Soup," said Gudrun, which no one argued with because giants carry stoves the way others carry rings. "Begin kindly," said SIV, and the barrels tapped answer like law. They worked. They threw lines not to conquer, but to persuade. They played Heimdall's welcome notes into wave, and it, offended and flattered, adjusted its manners. Loki told exactly one joke at the exact right moment, and the snake, vain, as all dangers are, laughed and loosened a coil. Chairs lined the seawall, and people took turns being tired. The mead went down the line in sips labeled by temperament. Workday mercy. Porch talk. Don't be impressive. Remember correctly. The storm, deprived of audience and given tea, agreed to be weather instead of theater. After, wet and unremarkable in the best sense, they sat. Someone began the grain sack song. The dead joined, careful on the second verse. Thor, who had stopped swinging long enough to push, ate 2 bowls and discovered the sacrament of not being in charge. Odin looked at the sea and did not demand prophecy. He asked how it was feeling. The sea, and used being consulted, offered a workshop on humility for winds. Night climbed down the cliff with the confidence of a woman, wearing black to everything. She counted heads, not names. She touched the barrel and the horn and the rope and the bell and blessed none of it. Blessing is not her department. But recorded everything for the parts of dawn that forget. On the harbor wall, in chalk that refused to wash off immediately, someone wrote the law that heaven had signed and kitchens had authored and giants had enforced and rivers had translated and the dead had endorsed and children had illustrated. Begin kindly. And because old habits die standing up, Odin looked at his spear as if it might miss him. He set it upright in the sand and hung a towel on it to dry. "Are we finished?" Leif asked, breathing like a boy who had learned how to ration heroism. "Never," said SIV, "but we've learned to stop for meals." Hrafna, from the mast of a boat that had behaved correctly, checked his eternal list. Story, ongoing. Chores, assigned. Joy, authorized. Grief, supervised. Law, portable. He flicked his beak toward Odin. Wisdom, unhoarded. Odin nodded, weary and relieved in the same rib. "It multiplies when poured," he said. "Like mead," SIV replied, tapping the cask for one last round. The first drink of the new age going where such drinks belong. Across, not up. They raised cups. Gods, mortals, giants, ghosts. The toast was not a victory, or forgetting, or inevitability. It was to the only policy that makes a world worth repairing. "To beginning kindly," Bryn said, and the sound went to the ruined halls like a new architecture. The mead tasted like work you wanted, love you could maintain, and rest you didn't have to apologize for. Somewhere far inland, a monastery hummed. Up mountain, a horn learned a lullaby. In a city, a hinge did its proud, quiet job. In a valley, a house for heavy, weather left the door cracked for whoever needed it next. And in the sky, a raven flew exactly nowhere, which is to say he stayed long enough to see it stick, and called to roll one last time for the day. "Alive!" he cried. "Present," answered the world. Night called the meeting the way night always does when she's serious. She turned down the stars to a work light and put on her practical black, the one with pockets for minutes. Cities blinked and felt seen. Rivers lowered their gossip to a murmur. Owls signed in. On SIV's hill the copper thrummed politely under its shadow cloth, while SIV tied her hair with a string that knew the names of knots. Leaf woke without being told, because boys hear meetings like bells. The summons brushed the world like a hand across bread, though, to check if it has risen. It had. They came to the old ring of stones that the Mead had quietly repurposed into a council chamber, not a circle of thrones. That trick had already failed in an earlier century, but a circle of benches that insisted your knees point towards someone else's courage. Odin arrived with the look of a man who has stopped hoarding wisdom and started budgeting it. Frigg brought a ledger and a towel. Freya came barefoot, hair braided with twine that used to be prophecy and had decided to be useful. Tyr folded his knife into his lap, like a promise that would only be opened if necessary. Bryn carried a cup with a dot and a song on its best behavior. Gudrun the Tall Enough came with 2 nieces, and the clause about teaching anger chores embroidered on her shawl by hands the size of plates. The locksmith brought hinges in a basket like fruit. The rivers sent Westbend with lanterns and Cutwater with sobriety. Winter arrived with nap folded twice, and a list of when not to use it. Complaint padded in and sat where the first excuse would normally stand. Hrafna took a high stone in his arrogance, which he considers a public service. Night lifted her palm and quiet fell with good posture. "We are here," she said, "because your success has started misbehaving." The wind coughed into its elbow. A small rain cloud looked at its shoes. "Reports," said Night. The first to speak was a storm with good references. It had delivered rain to farmers on time for centuries, occasionally with dramatic flourishes, but always within the bounds of decency. Now it twisted its hat. Since begin kindly, it said, "People invite us in for soup. We feel cherished. It is confusing. We keep stopping 2 fields early to rehearse gratitude. Show your work," Hrafna said, because he has tenure in mischief. The storm raised one edge and presented 3 afternoons of weather that had ended with applause and insufficient mud. Farmers had smiled too much. Children had been allowed outside too quickly. Rivers had been deprived of their favorite gossip. The sound fences make when you're unfair to them. Westbend sighed in estuary. "We need honest runoff," she said. "We cannot hydrate on compliments alone." Also, added Winter crisply, 3 blizzards attempted to apologize mid-performance and became inconvenient poetry. I had to call them in and make cocoa. This is unsustainable. Freya looked at the sky, which tried to behave. "We invented mercy for people," she said gently. "Weather requires competence." From a valley came a delegation of orchardists. Hats in hands like arguments they were willing to improve. "Since we legalized remembering," one said, "families reconcile so thoroughly a harvest that no one argues about ladders and someone falls. We have perhaps overshot forgiveness." Frigg wrote, "Ladders require choreography. We can fix this with choreography," she said. "And stew." A monk lifted a slate. Humming has become a distraction during fire drills. Bryn raised her hand to confess that the dead were enjoying chairs so much they were late to escorting the newly arrived. Gudrun grumbled that one avalanche had stopped short to admire itself, and that vanity in geology should be illegal. The locksmith reported a black market in sentimental hinges that looked like maybe but creaked like no. The eel sent a memo in beautiful cursive. Secrets refuse to admit deadlines that the room is too nice. Odin rubbed his beard until wisdom's chalk dust fell out. We have made kindness a default, he said. We failed to install friction. Friction, Hrafna repeated, pleased. An unpopular cousin of grace. Necessary for steering. Leaf lifted the bell. We can add a fourth note, he said. Not alarm, calibration. He struck at once at a key that reminded your bones how levers work. The world twitched into spine. Name it, said Knight. Boundary, said Leaf, cheeks pink with the audacity of inventing governance. Ring when we need to be kind and firm at the same time. Complaint yawned approval. Filed under no, thank you with biscuits. The council committed to the boundary bell for storms, kitchens, porches, and the afterlife. But Knight remained standing. There is more, she said quietly. The quiet behaved as if hired. She pointed toward the north where the sky goes thin and stories travel fast. Something old woke because you made room, she said. It is not unkind. It is convinced that mercy is a winter coat to be worn all year. It wants to smother the world with comfort. Who? Asked Odin, with the wariness of a carpenter. Knight turned her palm and a shape arrived at the edge of the ring. Tall, soft, cloaked in quilts. It smelled like milk and regret. Its eyes were the color of postponed chores. It bowed, deeply and well-meaning. I am Aunt Soft, it said, voice like a couch. Congratulations on your reforms. I have come to help. No more storms. No more arguments. No more sharp edges. We will tuck the world in. We will forgive everything before it occurs, to save time. Tyr's hand moved his knife, then away. He is not the executioner of relatives. Freya smiled the smile good women wear right before they commit to clarity. We do not forgive before harm, she said. Forgiveness without accountability is a blanket over mold. Aunt Soft beamed. Blankets are warm. Blankets rot. Winter said. Aspred. SIV stood. Flower on her sleeve lay a badge of reasonable miracles. Sit with us, she told Aunt Soft, and we'll pour what we pour for people who confuse comfort with care. She drew a small cask labeled Don't Be Impressive and poured into a cup that knew how to say stop. Aunt Soft sipped. For a second, a seam straightened in her posture. This tastes like chores, she said, offended. It tastes like maintenance, SIV said. Paradise runs on mops. Knight nodded, rare approval. We will need a charter addendum. Frigg raised her ledger. I propose a council of kindness, convene weekly for maintenance. Agenda: storm competency, ladder choreography, hinge ethics, nap zoning, and the calibration bell. Add a rule: mercy is not early. It arrives with bread and tools after truth. Seconded, said Bryn. Add a curriculum: apology, boundaries, song, sleep. Thirded, said Gudrun. Add anger chores to be audited quarterly by Andes. Fourth, said Westbend. Add rivers require honest mistakes. We will accept spilled buckets as tribute. Odin looked at Hrafna. Write the preface. Hrafna, delighted to be institutionalized without being domesticated, spoke as if telling a joke to a court clerk. This council is not a new empire. It is a porch with paperwork. We will not legislate wonder. We will schedule naps. Begin kindly. Continue precisely. End generously. Night inked it to the underside of the stars, where policy survived weather. They spent the day implementing. The storm received a badge. Certified weather. Authorized to ruin weddings kindly and fill reservoirs without apologies. Farmers were given a set of signs to hang. When smiling would starve the barley. We can laugh after rain. Winter delineated the difference between cocoa and complacency and installed a bell in kitchens that rings when hospitality becomes evasion. The monastery instituted humming windows and fire drill silence, both merciful. Valhalla added to its curriculum a unit on punctual escorting of the newly dead. Bryn deputized 3 grandmothers with brooms. The mountain outlawed avalanche selfies. The city band hinges at squeak, maybe when they mean no, would complain as undercover inspector. Aunt Soft lingered, hovering near the copper, as if warmth were jurisdiction. Leaf, who has a political instinct of a belle, offered her a job. Be quartermaster comfort, he said. You schedule blankets and tea and second chances, and you issue red tag for smothering. Aunt Soft, to her credit, clapped. I adore structure, she confessed. It prevents suffocation. She took up a clipboard the size of a quilt and began making lists that saved marriages, bakers, and at least one festival from becoming sentimental hash. In the afternoon, a test arrived disguised as neighbors. A sailor and a smith staggered into the ring mid-argument, dragging a net of accusations between them. He dented my boat with his anvil. He parked his boat in my forge. He laughs like rain on a tin roof. He behaves like a funeral that won't go home. Old world, duel. New world, meeting. The council pulled out 3 chairs and a cup with a dot. Bryn rang listening. Leaf rang boundary. SIV poured workday mercy. The storm, now wearing its badge, stood ready to be loud on command and quiet after. Complaint sat with his paws on the net. The smith spoke first, then the sailor. Their sentences arrived with elbows. Tears sliced the net into strands and handed each man the one that belonged to him. Frigg counted facts. Freya asked 2 questions that turned pride into confession without blood. Gudrun assigned both men anger chores. Hallwood for the House of Heavy Weather. Report sweat. Westbend required a repair schedule that respected tides. The locksmith installed a sign at the forge door. Boats do not belong here, even metaphorically. Aunt Soft added hot tea, exactly when resentment tried to nap on the job. The storm, a loud one small clap of thunder to reset the spine of the afternoon, behaved. In 20 minutes the men were embarrassed by how solvable their war had been. They shook hands. The council did not applaud. Policy is not theater. But Hrafna stamped his foot once to record an outcome. Decency 1, melodrama 0. The sailor volunteered to teach rope tricks to Valhalla's dead, who kept tripping over metaphors. The smith promised pegs. Complaint wrote, satisfactory. Biscuit issued. Toward evening, Knight checked her pockets for leftover minutes and found 3, which she spent on a lecture. You are doing well, she said, in the world, being human about praise, tried not to preen. Remember, begin kindly does not mean end easily. Your law gains meaning when it refuses to rescue cowardice. Hold your lines. Share your chairs. Ring your bells. Odin stood. The old god had the exact expression of a man about to say something properly boring and essential. We need departments, he said, and half the assembly groaned. He held up both hands. Not castles. Desks. The Council of Kindness will have 5 desks. Weather, doors, tables, songs, and sleep. Hrafna cackled. At last! Bureaucracy with appetites. They assigned leads. Weather. The store with a badge, supervised by Winter and 2 children who rate puddles. Doors. The locksmith, with Leaf and a grandmother who can smell a lie at 10 paces. Tables. SIV, Sissa, and Gudrun's nieces chartered to prevent meetings from starving and starvations from becoming meetings. Songs. Bryn, with a choir of the living and the politely dead. Sleep. Frigg and Aunt Soft, authorized to enforce naps by law during crisis. Penalties including blankets and authority removal. The eel surfaced in the council bowl and cleared his throat with bureaucratic charm. And secrets, he said. They require a desk. Knight inclined her head. Of course. You will chair. Mandate. Secrets that rot are turned. Secrets that protect are sealed. Secrets that boast are mocked. With relish, said the eel. They adjourned in the only respectable way. By eating. SIV lifted the cloth and the copper. The scent wrote minutes no clerk could improve. Bowls made their rounds like smart policy. Bread performed its sacrament. Freya taught a dishwashing technique called diplomacy. Thor carried water and sang second harmony to the grain sack song, proving he could be loud in support and quiet in charge. Odin dried cups and did not insist on a parable. Gudrun told a joke and updated a clause. Aunt Soft passed blankets and refused, very sweetly, to allow anyone to replace responsibility with cocoa. When it was nearly dark enough to be beautiful, Knight took a walk with Leaf around the edge of the ring, which is what leaders do with boys who are learning to be a different kind of loud. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Yes," he said, not brave about it, honest. What if we made it too soft? What if storms forget their jobs? What if the dead like chairs more than escort duty? What if giants sell nap passes under the table? What if begin kindly becomes begin cowardly? Knight smiled, which is never entirely reassuring. "That is why I called you all here. Kindness must be a verb with muscles. You have given it work. Keep giving it work." He nodded. The bell in his hand hummed a new note, boundary, and settled against his palm like a dog that had earned sleep. On the high stone, Hrafna did his final roll call for the day. Kindness, present. Boundaries, awake. Mercy, on schedule. Weather, certified. Songs, licensed. Doors, hinged. Tables, set. Sleep, armed. Secrets, filing. The world exhaled the way rooms do when purpose has replaced panic. And because stories earn their tomorrows, the horizon, ingratitude or mischief, delivered one. A scout ran up from the east with wind in her scarf. "News," she said, breath stacking politely. "A market has opened that sells counterfeit begin kindly. It looks right, smells sweet, and leaves people very impressed with themselves. They are calling it Easy Grace. They are making money." SIV tightened her apron like armor. "Of course they are," she said. "Tomorrow we raid, with audits and ladles." Odin picked up a pen and not a spear. Frigg packed receipts. Bryn sharpened a song into a lullaby with teeth. Gudrun cracked her knuckles in the key of regulation. Freya smiled the way peaches do when they've been chosen for a recipe that will embarrass pride. Aunt Soph assembled her red tags. The eel requested a briefcase. Complaint wagged once and licked his chops. Night raised her hand. The stars returned to their usual wattage. "Meeting adjourned," she said. "Dream bravely. Begin kindly again in the morning." They broke the circle with the practiced humility of people who know that circles reform wherever chairs are honest. The copper hummed. The bells slept. The wind went back to work with its badge pinned straight. On the lintel of the sky, where laws hang when they've been well written, a new line appeared beneath the old one. Begin kindly. Continue firmly. End generously. Nap when foolishness gets loud. Leaf laughed, pocketed the sound, and walked beside SIV toward the hill that keeps doing what hills do best, hosting the next necessary thing. The market announced itself with lanterns that had been taught to flatter. They burned the particular shade of gold that says generosity while counting your coins. Stalls bloomed like apologies rehearsed in front of a mirror. Polished wood, white cloth, bowls lined up in ranks as tidy as repentance. The sign over the archway read in a friendly font, "Begin kindly, now easier than ever." That word, easier, was a stone in the soup. SIV stopped 3 paces from the threshold, the way a baker stops when a loaf smells like a compliment with something missing. Leaf held the bell against his chest like a steward of heartbeat. Freya adjusted the string in her hair and smiled with the precise politeness of a woman who has forgiven 7 kingdoms and 1 cousin but reserves the right to audit. They had not come alone. The eel traveled in a small bowl under a damp cloth, because secrets don't fare well unchaperoned. Complaint patted in the shade of tables with his union tail, already in contention with the smell of commerce. 2 grandmothers from the house for heavy weather carried clipboards and biscuits. They wore aprons that could indict, at a respectful distance. 3 young monks kept slates ready to write down what couldn't be said out loud without losing accuracy. "Remember," Freya murmured, "we are not here to win. We are here to separate medicine from perfume." "Perfume is medicine's cousin," Leaf said, eyes wide. "The one who lies to get invited." SIV stepped under the arch. The air tried to be appetizing. "Honey, yes. Grain, yes. Lightning, no." It had been replaced by a noise that pretended to be courage. The generosity note, the one that had done the math and decided to ignore it, was missing entirely, and in its place a perfume that said you are already the person you praise yourself for wanting to become. At the first stall, a boy no older than Leaf hawked small vials tied with friend-colored ribbon. "Mercy in a minute," he chirped. "Easy grace." 1 sip turns enemies into applause. What if I need a neighbor instead? SIV asked. Comes with applause. The boy said. The grandmothers took notes, so pointed the table stood up straighter. Complaint sniffed a vial, sneezed, and filed a note under sugared cowardice. Strong odor. They moved on. A brewer with immaculate hair sold casks labeled Porch Talk and Workday Mercy in a script that had met success and borrowed its shoes. He poured taste into cups shaped like compliments. A queue politely forgave one another for being ahead. Laughter arrived quickly. Too quickly. Sharp and musical. Without doing the work of washing the dishes that jokes leave in the sink. Apologies bloomed like annuals. No roots in sight. SIV tasted because science's favorite mood is skeptical. The liquid was sweet, barely fermented. Spice like a story eager to be retold without witnesses. It made her tongue feel talented and her hands feel unnecessary. She swallowed and an urge appeared, faint but treacherous. To be impressive, she spat discreetly behind the stall and wiped her mouth with her sleeve. That's not mead, she said. That's applause. Freya tasted and raised one eyebrow into administrative heaven. It's joy without chore, she said. It leave the floor sticky. Leaf did not taste. He listened, because bells learn new notes by eavesdropping. Everywhere, people were forgiving, preemptively elegantly, at volume. A woman announced, I forgive my husband, in a tone that did not indicate any discussion with the actual husband had occurred. A man declared, I forgive myself for everything, while the eel tapped the glass of his bowl with his tail like a gavel. Forgery doctrine, the eel said. Forgiveness without confession. Confession without repair. Repair outsourced the vibes. By noon, the delegation reached the central pavilion. White canvas stretched tight as pretense. A crowd had gathered. On a raised platform draped with banners the color of wealth, pretending to be sunlight, a tall figure spoke into a horn polished smooth by certainty. He wore a mantle stitched with tiny reflective discs that multiplied light until it felt important. His hair was the color of coin. His smile made witnesses redundant. I am the merchant of light, he announced, and the crowd sighed like pockets. For centuries you waited at the feet of gods for permission to be good. For years you waited and counseled for kindness to be scheduled. No more. Begin kindly, made portable. No chores. No naps. No committees. Just you and your glow. Why build a table when you can buy the feeling of having fed everyone? At his feet, assistants in spotless aprons poured easy grace into cups with a flourish that had practiced its sincerity. People drank and their eyes went shiny with self-love that does not require neighbors. Leaf took a step forward and Freya's fingers landed on his shoulder, warm, anchoring. Let him finish lying, she said. It's a courtesy we offer performers. SIV raised a hand, not to speak but to observe. It doesn't clink, she said. Proper mead clinks against the cup like a tool greeting a table. This pats. Freya nodded. And notice, no one is eating. They listened to the pitch. It was beautiful. Beauty is a substance. It needs supervision. It promised a world without storms, without hard conversations, without apologies that took their shoes off and stayed. It sold mercy like a luxury and kindness like a cologne. People bought. People posed. People forgave themselves for what they were about to do. When applause had exhausted itself, Leaf climbed onto a crate and rang the bell. One short note for Boundary. Heads turned. Boundary is not popular at markets. Question, Leaf said, voice respectful to the part of the crowd that might be tired of itself. Where are the chairs? Laughter, indulgent. We don't need chairs, said the merchant, amused by sincerity. We'll all stand together in light. Freya's smile sharpened into a needle. You are selling a standing ovation, she said. Who cleans the floor? A murmur that might have been thought. The merchant of light widened his grin. We employ cleaners, he said, at a discount for exposure. Exposure, said a grandmother, and the biscuit in her pocket achieved legal status as a weapon. SIV stepped forward with a barrel on a handcart, cask stamped by her palm and by weather, chalk on the side, calibration. We brought the antidote to your perfume, she said. Not a duel, a tasting. The assistants laughed a nervous laugh that sounds the same in all languages. The merchant gestured magnanimously. "We welcome comparison," he said. "Our product speaks for itself." "It sings for itself," SIV said. "Speaking requires teeth." They set 2 tables. On one, easy grace in its bright vials, cups shaped like praise. On the other, SIV's cask, cups with room for air, a platter of bread, a bowl of pickles, because mercy needs an honest hour. The test began. People tasted the counterfeit first. Smiles bloomed. Spines softened. Declarations sprouted like decorative weeds. Then they crossed, fidgeting a little as if committing adultery with truth. SIV poured sparingly. "Small sips," she said. "This is not a performance. It's a policy." They drank. They paused. One by one you could see it. The impression unraveling, the appetite returning. Hands found work. Eyes stopped looking at themselves from across the room and started noticing neighbors. Someone set down a mirror without ceremony. A woman put her cup aside and said, "I need to go apologize in the kitchen." A man looked at the eel and said, "Will you file this for later? I think I'm ready to tell it." The eel stamped an invisible form and hummed. Side effects, SIV announced cheerfully, include honesty, hunger, chores, and naps at appropriate times. Please consult your grandmother if kindness lasts more than 4 hours without producing dishes. The merchant of light smiled dimmed by a lumen. "Nostalgia," he said lightly. "For labor." "For life," Freya corrected, equally lightly. "Your glow is a tax shelter. Ours is a stove." He tried a different spell. "Pity? You've made the world so complicated," he said. "Forms, councils, bells, rules. People don't have time. People are tired." "We know," Frigg said, stepping to the crowd with her ledger like a saint with recipes. "That's why we invented naps, schedules, and chairs." The merchant decided on menace. "Fine," he said, still smiling, the kind of smile teeth suggest to faces. "But you cannot outlaw light. Light doesn't mind regulation," Night said, arriving without fanfare. "Shadows zipped up properly. It has angles." "Besides," Hrafna added, finally bored enough to be useful, "you're not selling light. You're selling reflections of reflections, and charging per glance." "Do you accuse me?" the merchant said. "Of theft?" "Of fakery." A ripple through the crowd. People love trials when the defendant looks expensive. "Of shortcuts," SIV said, "which always lead back to the same place, yourself." Leaf lifted the bell and waited. When the market had settled into the posture that resembles attention, he rang boundary and then listening. "We don't shut you down," he said, astonishing himself by how many gods and giants took his cue. "We asked for audit." "On what authority?" the merchant asked, as if authority were a cape you buy. "On the authority of kitchens and funerals and floods," Bryn said, appearing from the shade line with the cup marked by a dot. "On the law signed in heaven and chalked on porches. Begin kindly, continue firmly, end generously, nap when foolishness gets loud. There is no good retort to a law that can bake." The merchant sneered beautifully. "Beauty under audit becomes brittle." "Very well," he said. "Test me." SIV nodded. 3 questions. She ladled calibration into 3 cups. "Drink before each answer," she ordered, "or your tongue will try to be clever. First, where is your kitchen?" "My brand does not require kitchens," he said, not drinking. The crowd heard the dry click of truth closing a door. "Second, where does your waste go?" "We compost," he began, then caught the eel's eye and drank. The Mead tugged at his boasting muscle. "We market the empties as vessels of self-care," he confessed, losing altitude. "Third," said Freya, "what do you do when storms come?" "We sell umbrellas," he said promptly, with inspirational runes. He smiled again, this time without even himself for company. "And we offer discounts for people who can't afford not to buy." "Penalties," complaint growled, and the word wagged its tail. The crowd shifted. People looked at the cups in their hands the way citizens look at leaflets left on their porches, polite but unwilling to be recruited. A woman raised her voice, clean and ordinary. "My sister has been drinking Easy Grace for a week," she said. She forgives everything and refuses to fix anything. Yesterday she forgave my roof for leaking. Bring her, SIV said softly. We'll give her lunch. Then we'll teach her to patch. The merchant tried one last spell. He opened his arms and poured out the light he had hoarded. The pavilion blazed like applause caught in a net. Because people are adorable in groups. The light washed over SIV and Freya and Leaf, over the eel and Complaint and the grandmothers and the monks and the refugees from kitchens. It reached for their shadows. The shadows would not budge. Good, Knight said, pleased. You tested the right thing. Integrity is not glare-resistant. It is glare-indifferent. SIV stepped into the glare the way a baker steps into heat, armed with recipes. She put her palm on the merchant's chest, not unkindly, and the light ran around her hand like water around a post and revealed the architecture beneath. Mirrors, angled to reflect the viewer back at their favorite self. The mirrors were patched with a bit of old hymns and marketing and abandoned vows. It was very pretty. It was not a home. We won't smash them, she said. Breaking glass makes more of it. We'll re-angle. By what right, he whispered, terrified suddenly of a world with chores. By invitation, Freya said, and looked at the people. Who wants to work? Hands rose, not in triumph. In consent, the grandmothers distributed cloths and instructions with the sweet tyranny of competence. The eel assigned secrecy protocols. Not all illusions need public shaming. Some need quiet disposal. Complaint supervised boundaries with biscuits. Monks wrote down the new angles and the phrases that had accidentally saved lives. Leaf rang the calibration bell when old glamours tried to sneak back in. Night held the light at the right temperature. Together, they turned a hall of mirrors into windows. Outside, real weather continued, respectful and unsentimental. The merchant of light stood, panting like a man who has run from humility and been caught by it gently. He was still tall. He was still beautiful. He was no longer employable by despair. What will I do? He asked no one in particular, which is the best way to start a life. Sell lamps that show dirt, SIV said. They sell very well to people who like clean. And umbrellas that are honest about rain, said the storm, adjusting its badge. And mirrors that tell you if there's soup on your face, said a grandmother, who had been waiting all day to deploy this line. He laughed, once properly, and wrote himself a job description with a small, obedient pen. It did not include the word light in capital letters. It included delivery schedules and nap breaks, and a clause about returns without shame. By dusk, the market smelled like bread and sincerity. People had started eating. The easy gray stall now offered hard grays, which came with a towel and a list of questions. The counterfeit casks were stamped not for beverage use and repurposed as planters for herbs that make truth taste better. Someone played a work song. Someone else harmonized badly. The world did not mind. SIV sat on the tailgate of the handcart and poured water on the ground in thanks. Freya leaned against a post and took her sandals off and became not divine but, briefly, accurate. Leaf held the bell and listened for whatever the next necessary thing would sound like. Night arrived, pocket full of minutes spent well. You did not win, she observed. We audited, SIV said. You built, Freya said. We ate, Leaf said. Night nodded, and the stars did a small bureaucratic shuffle to reflect the update. There will be more markets, she warned. Counterfeits breed in comfort. We'll bring ladles, SIV said, and grandmothers. From the edge of the square, a courier ran up, hair full of wind, voice full of freshly printed trouble. News, she said. A city downriver has declared eternal festival. No chores, no curfews, no fire codes. They say begin kindly means we never stop dancing. West Bend rolled her eyes in estuary. They will stop when their lanterns set the bunting on fire. Tomorrow, Freya said, elastic good humor tucked behind her ear like a pencil. We bring buckets in the nap law. The eel packed his briefcase. Complaint licked a child who'd been too brave to nap. The monks put their slates under their arms like shields you can write on. The merchant of light picked up a broom and began sweeping his own pavilion with the look of a man who has discovered joy in not glowing. Hrafna landed on the archway and took attendance because excess is his ethics. Kindness, present. Counterfeits, converting, markets, housebroken. Whether employed, work, eaten, joy on peril, pride. Demoted to spice, boundaries ringable. SIV pushed the handcart toward the road. Leaf walked beside her with the bells silent and awake. Freya brushed sand from her feet and laughed a laugh that embarrasses shortcuts. Night fell, not as a curtain but as a roof, one that will leak if you don't check it, which is why the Council of Kindness carries ladders. They set off toward the next necessary thing, leaving behind a market that had learned the difference between light and mirrors, and a new sign over the arch, written in a hand that might have been anyone's. Begin kindly. Bring tools. Ring for boundaries. Eat first. The river carried them downstream in a mood that could only be described as festive against its will. Lanterns drifted beside the boat, bobbing like gossip too pretty to drown. Music traveled ahead of them. Drums that refused to fade, voices stretched across the water until even silence began to tap its foot. West Bend steered, sighing. They've been singing for 3 days, she said. The water is exhausted. Leaf leaned over the side, eyes wide at the lights. It's beautiful, he whispered. It's expensive, SIV answered. She held the tiller steady, watching the reflection of fireworks in the current. Every firework borrows from a candle that should have been in a window. The storm rode above them, newly unionized, wearing its badge of certified weather. It grumbled under its breath. Rumblings about noise ordinances, about thunder without context. I like joy, it muttered, but they're using it without supervision. As the city came into view, Freya pressed her hand against her chest. The air itself was sparkling, drunk on sound. It smells like laughter left out overnight, she said. The City of Eternal Festival had no walls. It had bunting. Banners hung from roof to river, stitched from dresses, curtains, tablecloths, everything soft that could flutter. The streets were carpeted with confetti thick as frost. Every window had become a stage. Every roof held dancers. The bells of the churches had been commandeered by percussionists. It was magnificent, until you noticed the smoke. No one noticed the smoke. They moored the boat at a dock made entirely of barrels lashed together by optimism. A boy with glitter in his hair greeted them. "Welcome to Forever Now," he shouted. "Dance tax is voluntary. Naps are banned." SIV climbed onto the dock and immediately had to steady herself as the boards wobbled in time to the drums. "We're from the Council of Kindness," she said. "We'd like to inspect your fire codes." The boy blinked, confused. "Fire codes? Oh, the fire loves us. It's part of the show." A cheer erupted somewhere uphill, bright, too bright. The crowd turned their faces toward the flame that leapt like applause. "Their lanterns are drunk," the storm muttered. They pushed into the city. Everywhere they went, people smiled, wide, unbroken, brittle. Tables overflowed with food that no one ate. Music blared without gaps. The musicians rotated like soldiers on watch. A woman in sequins laughed at nothing until her throat gave out, and 2 friends propped her up to keep laughing silently. Leaf covered his ears. It's like the joy forgot the joke. Freya placed a hand on his shoulder. Joy's joke is always that it ends. They're trying to outwit punchlines. They reached the central square, where a stage had been built from dismantled bridges. On it stood the festival mayor, tall, charming, pupils like sparklers. He wore a crown of paper tickets and a suit that glimmered with foil. "We have banished sorrow," he shouted into a horn. "We have outlawed boredom. We have liberated every dance from music. We—" The speech was interrupted by a crack from behind the stage. A banner caught fire. The crowd cheered louder to compete with the sound. SIV stepped forward, rolling up her sleeves. "Right," she said. "Let's start with buckets." No one moved. The crowd was too busy celebrating the illusion of control. Freya climbed onto the stage beside the mayor. She didn't shout. She simply spoke in a tone that made even drums listen. "You're tired," she said. He laughed. "We are eternal." "You're hoarse," she said gently. "And your city is flammable." A ripple of uncertain laughter. The mayor's smile trembled. "You can't stop the party. If we stop, we'll remember the war. We'll remember the empty years. We'll remember." Memory isn't an enemy, Bryn said, emerging from the crowd with the cup marked by a dot. It's rehearsal for better. Leaf struck the boundary bell, one clear note, simple as breath. It cut through the music like mercy through denial. The sound made the fire flicker, made the dancers hesitate, made a child nearby finally yawn. The storm descended, cloak of thunder rolling. "Permission to rain," it asked. "Please," SIV said. Rain fell. Real rain, not special effects. It hissed against hot stone, ran down faces painted in celebration, turned confetti into pulp and sincerity. Some screamed, ruined makeup, ruined costumes. But others, those who had been quietly afraid of their own exhaustion, laughed with relief. The mayor dropped his horn. "It's over," he whispered. "It's beginning," Freya corrected. She handed him a towel. "Everything worth dancing for starts with rest." The council moved to the square like midwives. SIV organized buckets, guiding hands that had only learned to wave into work. Leaf rang the bell again, slower, letting silence grow between notes. Bryn poured workday mercy into cups and passed them along. People drank, blinked, sat. Some began to cry, not theatrically, but humanly. Complaint trotted through the puddles, approving. By dawn, the city smelled of rain and bread. The banners hung limp, but the air breathed. On the blackened stage, the mayor stood barefoot beside Freya, hair plastered to his forehead. "We thought kindness meant never stopping," he said. "We didn't know it included sleep." "Sleep is applause done right," Freya said. They helped rebuild the bridges with boards that no longer wanted to be stages. The storm lingered, polite and tired, and left behind 3 rainbows for bookkeeping. Children collected wet confetti and pressed it into bricks that dried into a new wall for the school that would open next week. That evening, SIV wrote a notice on the city gate in chalk that would wash away the next rain. "Begin kindly. Dance honestly. Stop before you break something beautiful." The people left bread on the wall as tribute. When they sailed away, the river sparkled. Not from lanterns this time, but from stars reflected in water finally dark enough to show them. Hrafna, gliding above, took attendance. Joy rehired. Rain rehabilitated. Fire on probation. Silence welcome. Council present. SIV leaned on the tiller, eyes on the horizon where smoke met morning. Where next? Night, riding her pocket of minutes high in the clouds, answered softly, wherever someone mistakes comfort for grace again, which is to say, soon. The bell chimed once, content, and the river, grateful for the pause between songs, carried them toward the next necessary thing.